I was sorting through a week's worth of junk mail when I saw it an envelope with no return address, just my name written in that rigid, unmistakable handwriting. For a second, I thought about tossing it, but something made my fingers stop. I opened it, heart tight and mind racing. It was a funeral invitation. My father was dead. I stared at the crisp paper, trying to feel something. Sadness, anger, relief maybe, but there was nothing. Just a dull numbness, like my emotions had packed up and left a decade ago about the same time I walked away from the Walsh family for good. Back then, I was 23, bruised and bleeding, with a screaming infant in the backseat and a suitcase full of baby clothes. I'd left Jason, the man who did more damage to my spirit than my skin, and gone straight to my father's porch. He looked at my black eye, then my baby, then right through me like I was some stranger begging for scraps. "You made your bed," he'd said, so I made a new one. In a tiny Savannah apartment with cracked walls and creaky floors, I started over. I shelved books at the library. I read bedtime stories to my son. I stitched myself back together one quiet evening at a time. And even though my father never called, never asked, never once apologized, I still made sure he had what he needed. Every month, like clockwork, I sent money through Mr. Lane, the old man next door. I told no one, not even Caleb. Now, holding this letter in my hands, all I could think was, why now? Why invite the daughter you decided didn't exist? Caleb noticed the change in my face. At 13, he was too observant for his own good. "You going to go?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. I couldn't answer. My throat had closed around a knot I didn't know was there. "Maybe," he continued gently, "maybe he left something for you. Something more than just a will." I looked at him, my reason for surviving. My reminder that love doesn't have to come from blood. And for the first time since I opened the envelope, I felt something shift. If there was anything left to be said, maybe I needed to hear it. So I packed a bag, and I went back to the town that never wanted me. The chapel in Charleston looked smaller than I remembered. Same wooden beams, same stained glass windows, only now muted by a slate gray sky. I stepped inside with Caleb beside me, his hand clutching mine tight. Heads turned before we even made it to the aisle. Whispers sparked like dry leaves. Some people looked shocked. Others just stared, like they'd seen a ghost walk in. And then, there they were. Sabrina and Eric, dressed in black like it was a fashion statement. Her eyes met mine first. She smirked. "Well, well," she murmured, loud enough for the nearest pews to hear. "Looks like the exile thinks there's still money on the table." Eric chuckled beside her, but his eyes held no humor, just the same cold judgment I grew up under. I didn't respond, just kept walking. I chose the last row, furthest from the altar, furthest from them. Caleb slid in beside me, his grip still tight. I leaned down. "It's okay," I whispered. "We're just here to sit." But I knew it wasn't okay. The service began with prayers. Shaky eulogies followed, mostly about business accomplishments and Sabrina's endless devotion. Not once did anyone mention me. I was erased. They spoke of vacations and mentorships, of Eric's flights home to help manage the estate. The narrative was clean, sterile, rewritten. Caleb rested his head on my shoulder, still and quiet. I sat, rigid, watching a slideshow of memories I was never allowed to be part of. When the service ended, people filtered out with polite nods and fake tears. A few glanced my way, their eyes sliding off like water. Sabrina strutted past me without a glance. Eric stopped just long enough to smirk. "Didn't think you had the guts to show up," he said. "Neither did I." He leaned in. "Don't get comfortable. This isn't your story anymore." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The Walsh family estate hadn't changed. Same white columns, same red bricks, same ivy clawing at the porch railings like it was trying to choke the house from the outside. But walking inside felt like stepping into a memory frozen in ice. Cold, quiet, unwelcoming. I recognized most of the faces. Old neighbors, cousins, former business partners. None of them looked at me directly. Conversation stilled when I entered. I felt their stares like tiny pinpricks down my back. Sabrina was already by the fireplace, swirling white wine like this was some gala. Eric leaned beside her, blazer unbuttoned, red wine in hand, posture too casual for grief. When they saw me, Eric smirked. "Well, this won't take long," he said to no one in particular. "She got cut out years ago." A few awkward chuckles echoed. Others turned away, suddenly interested in their shoes. I didn't react. I kept my coat on, even though the fire crackled. Caleb stayed glued to my side, his little fingers laced in mine. I could feel his tension, every inch of his body reading the room like it was a test he couldn't fail. We sat in the far corner, away from the laughter, away from the sneers. I looked around. Family photos still lined the walls, Eric on his boat, Sabrina at her law school graduation. No pictures of me. Not one. Sabrina caught my eye, her smile sharp. "You can sit, Rachel," she said sweetly. "Just don't expect a chapter." I gave her nothing. But Caleb looked up at me with a strange focus, like he was waiting for something. And deep down, I knew he was right to wait. The front door creaked open again, and in walked Mr. Harlan, my father's lawyer. Neat gray suit, briefcase in one hand, a small cedar box in the other. The room fell into a hush. "Thank you for coming," he said, voice firm but calm. "Per Mr. Walsh's instructions, we'll begin with a video message before moving to the will." "A video?" Sabrina snorted. "Can't we just skip to the part where she gets nothing?" Mr. Harlan didn't flinch. "Your father insisted. This comes first." He set the cedar box on the coffee table, unlatched the briefcase, and retrieved a remote. Caleb sat up straighter, his grip loosening just slightly. I glanced down. His face was glowing with something soft, hope. And for the first time since stepping into that house, I didn't feel alone. The screen flickered to life. There he was, my father, older, frailer, but unmistakably him, sitting at the desk that used to be off limits. "If Rachel is watching this," he began, "I owe you the apology I never gave." Every breath in the room stilled. My father's voice cracked slightly as he continued, eyes fixed on the camera like he was finally willing to face the daughter he turned away. "I was wrong, Rachel. I let my pride speak louder than love. I saw you show up that night, bruised and scared, holding a baby and hoping your father would just open the door. And I didn't. I failed you because I was more interested in preserving my rules than protecting my own blood." A ripple moved through the room. Chairs shifted. Someone coughed, but I didn't care. My eyes were locked on the screen. Caleb didn't say a word either. He just reached for my hand, soft and steady, grounding me while the man on screen unraveled a decade of silence. "I judged you for leaving your husband," he said. "Told myself you were being dramatic, emotional, selfish. But the truth is, you had more strength than I ever gave you credit for. You walked away from something that was killing you, and I punished you for it. I didn't want to believe that my daughter could survive without me, so I erased you instead. I made it easier for myself to feel right by pretending you weren't there at all." He leaned forward in his chair then, fingers trembling slightly. "But I saw you, even when I pretended not to. Gerald told me things. About the job at the library, about how Caleb was thriving, about how you still sent money, every month without fail, never asking for anything in return. And that," he paused, voice catching, "that broke something in me. I could feel the heat behind my eyes, the sting of words that arrived too late, but still carried weight." Around us, the room had grown still. Even Sabrina's wineglass had stopped its rhythm. "You were never the weak one," he said. "You were the brave one. You protected your child when I wouldn't even protect mine. And if there's one thing I want you to know before I go, it's that I am proud of you, proud of the life you built without help, proud of the mother you became, proud of the daughter I didn't deserve." For a second, no one breathed. Then the screen went black. Silence stretched like string pulled too tight. I wasn't sure if anyone knew what to say, but I didn't need their words. I had finally heard his. Mr. Harlan adjusted his glasses and opened the folder in his lap. "That message," he said evenly, "was intended to provide personal context before the will is read. As per Mr. Walsh's final, legally notarized instructions, I will now begin reading the terms." Sabrina let out an audible sigh, the kind that came with someone bracing for battle. Eric folded his arms, that smug look returning to his face like nothing had changed. But everything had. "Mr. Harlan cleared his throat and began. To my daughter, Rachel Elise Walsh, one leave the family residence at 42 Crescent Oaks, its contents, and the surrounding property in full." Gasps spread through the room like wildfire. My name had barely left his lips before heads whipped toward me. Sabrina sat up straighter, mouth slightly open. Eric's jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle twitch. "In addition, Mr. Harlan continued, I leave to Rachel Walsh the sum of $250,000 in liquid assets and full access to all remaining balances in my retirement savings account." My breath caught. I wasn't prepared for any of this. I came expecting nothing, maybe a few cold stares, a reminder that I was still an outsider. But this was more than forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. It was restoration. I barely heard the next part until Caleb gasped softly. "To her son, Caleb Walsh, Mr. Harlan said, I leave a fully funded educational trust in the amount of $100,000. I looked down at him. He was staring at me like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to believe it. I wasn't sure either. To my son, Eric, and to my daughter, Sabrina, Mr. Harlan continued, I leave the following: a curated collection of family photo albums, my military compass, and the Bible given to me by my mother. That was it. No money, no property, no shares. Nothing else. A stunned silence swept the room. You could practically feel the disbelief clawing at the walls. Sabrina jumped to her feet, her voice brittle with panic. No, absolutely not. This is a mistake. My father wouldn't. He wasn't thinking clearly. Mr. Harlan didn't even flinch. The documents were updated 2 years ago, long before any signs of cognitive decline. All certifications are in place. Witnessed, filed, final. Eric stood slowly, face tight, like he was trying to control the explosion simmering just beneath his skin. You expect us to believe he just gave everything to her after ignoring her for years? No way. Mr. Harlan closed the folder with a calm finality. Your father requested one final note be read, he said, pulling a handwritten letter from the inside pocket of his suit. He asked that I read it word for word. The room tensed again, this time laced with anger and disbelief. But Mr. Harlan read anyway. Let them remember who showed up when it mattered. Let them remember who gave when there was nothing to gain. This house, this life, this legacy, it belongs to the one person who never stopped loving despite being unloved. The letter ended, and so did any hope Sabrina or Eric had of salvaging control. Sabrina's face flushed deep red. She stared at me like I was a stranger who'd robbed her in broad daylight. You manipulated him, she said suddenly, her voice rising with panic. You played the long game, didn't you? That's why you sent money. It wasn't love, it was strategy. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The message had said enough. You don't deserve this, she hissed. But the words came out weaker than before. Like even she didn't believe them. Eric didn't speak again. He just turned, jaw locked, and stalked out of the room. Sabrina followed seconds later, slamming her wine glass down with more force than necessary before storming through the doorway. And just like that, they were gone. The crowd began to thin out too. People who hadn't spoken to me in 10 years suddenly couldn't meet my eyes. Some offered stiff nods. A few whispered awkward condolences. But mostly, they just left. Maybe they realized what they'd ignored. Maybe guilt had a sound, and today it sounded like shuffling feet and doors clicking shut. I sat quietly with Caleb, letting the weight of it all settle. This wasn't about the money or the house. It was about the fact that I wasn't invisible anymore. I'd spent so long being the family ghost, the daughter that didn't count. But now, here I was, present, named, chosen. Caleb leaned against me again, and I wrapped an arm around his shoulders. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. We didn't leave the house right away. Caleb stayed nestled close, and I let him. I think he needed to feel the moment land just as much as I did. The weight of everything, the letter, the will, the silence that followed, had settled on us like dust from a long closed door cracking open. For the first time in 10 years, I didn't feel like a stranger in this house. I didn't feel erased. I felt real, anchored, like someone had finally spoken my name without shame. When the last of the guests were gone, and only the fireplace still murmured in its low orange hum, Mr. Harlan came over and handed me a small envelope. He wrote this for you alone, he said simply, then nodded and left with the same quiet dignity he'd brought in. I didn't open it yet. I didn't need more words right now. What I needed was air. I stood and walked through the hallway that once echoed with judgment, past the same crooked frame that held family pictures I wasn't in. My fingers brushed the edge of the banister as I made my way up the stairs I hadn't climbed since I was 23. The second floor was just as I remembered. Polished hardwood, stiff guest room beds. The faint scent of lemon polish and lavender soap. When I reached my old bedroom door, I paused, then opened it. It was empty, clean, but not untouched. The shelves were bare, the posters gone, but the walls still wore the faint outlines of the life I'd once lived here. Stickers peeled off in the corners, a dent where a chair had scraped too hard. I walked in slowly, letting the years settle in around me. I could still hear the sound of old fights muffled through the floor, still feel the heat of shame when my father's voice would boom from down the hall. I stood in the center of the room and let it all come back, not to relive it, but to release it. This space, these walls, they no longer held power over me. Downstairs, Caleb was exploring too. I heard the faint creak of floorboards near the kitchen and smiled. He had always been good at reading rooms, at sensing when it was safe to be curious. I headed down to find him standing in the sunroom, staring at a row of old books on a dusty shelf. This place is kinda cool, he said, glancing back at me. Creepy, but cool. I nodded. Yeah, It's weird being back. Are we gonna live here now? He asked, not with fear, but with genuine wonder. I hadn't thought that far ahead. I hadn't thought past the letter, the will, the way Sabrina had looked at me like I stole her future. I don't know yet, I said honestly, but it's ours now. We get to choose. That was a new feeling, having a say. My whole life in this family, choice had always felt like an illusion. Everything was decided before I arrived. Expectations were spoken in silences, rules baked into the looks I got when I dared to think differently. But now, I could feel something loosening. I wasn't trapped in the past anymore. I was standing on the other side of it. That night, we stayed in the guest room. I changed the sheets, opened the windows, and let the cool breeze sweep through. Caleb fell asleep quickly, his breathing soft, a peaceful rhythm I hadn't heard in weeks. I sat by the window and finally opened the letter Mr. Harland had given me. It was short. Just a few lines, handwritten in that same stiff, all too familiar script. Rachel, if you're reading this, it means you came. I wasn't sure you would. I didn't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it, but I hope this home gives you something back. Not just the walls or the land, but a place where you can finally feel safe. I see now what I didn't. Back then you didn't leave to escape me. You left to save yourself. And that was brave. I hope this house is more than a memory. I hope it's a new beginning. Love, Dad. I folded the letter slowly, hands steady, heart quiet. Not healed, but no longer bleeding. The next morning, the sun poured through the windows like it hadn't in years. The house felt less like a mausoleum and more like a space waiting to exhale. I made coffee in the ancient kitchen, watching the kettle steam while Caleb padded in wearing socks that slid across the wood like ice skates. Can we paint my room? He asked, holding up a random swatch he found in a drawer. Eventually, I said with a smile, but first I think we need to clean this place top to bottom. He groaned dramatically, but I saw the grin tucked behind it. We spent the rest of the day going room to room, dusting, sweeping, pulling back curtains that hadn't been opened in years. The attic was full of boxes, some labeled with Eric and Sabrina's names, others anonymous. I didn't touch theirs. Not out of fear, just disinterest. Their chapter was over. They had walked out and slammed the door behind them. I had no reason to chase. What surprised me most was how easily the house started to shift. Not physically, spiritually. The silence wasn't sharp anymore. It was soft. Room by room, it started to feel like we were replacing the memories that hurt with ones that fit. That night, I tucked Caleb into a bed that once belonged to a version of me I barely remembered. He looked up at me as I sat on the edge of the mattress. Do you think he really meant it? The video? I paused, then nodded. I do. I think he said everything the way he knew how. It doesn't fix what happened, but it helps. Caleb thought for a second. I think he was scared. Of you. Of what you did. You were strong when he couldn't be. That landed harder than I expected. Out of the mouth of a kid, truth often cuts clean. Yeah, I whispered. Maybe he was. And just like that, I felt something settle in me, a release I didn't know I'd been holding on to. I kissed Caleb's forehead, turned off the light, and stepped into the hallway that used to feel endless and cold. Now, it just felt like a hallway. The days passed in a rhythm that surprised me. I started to unpack not just the physical things, but the weight I'd carried. Old mail stacked in corners, forgotten photos in drawers. I found one of me when I was 10, hidden behind a stack of yearbooks. I was smiling, half a tooth missing, freckles across my nose. I didn't recognize the girl. Not because I looked different, but because she still believed family meant safety. I kept the photo anyway, not as a memory, but as a reminder. That little girl had become someone worth fighting for. Sabrina didn't call. Neither did Eric. I expected legal threats. I expected lawyers or thinly veiled insults through mutual acquaintances. But nothing came, just silence. And honestly, that felt like peace. One afternoon, a knock at the door startled me. It wasn't forceful, just steady. I opened it to find Mr. Lane Old, hunched a bit more than I remembered, but with the same warm eyes. I just wanted to see how you were doing, he said. Your father, he wasn't a man of many words, but he kept every letter you sent, every envelope. He handed me a small bundle, rubber banded together. I took it with quiet hands. Thank you, I said, for making sure he was taken care of. Mr. Lane smiled. You did that. I just passed it along. When he left, I sat on the porch steps, letters in my lap, breeze brushing through my hair, and realized something simple and profound. I was home. Not the way I had imagined it when I was younger. Not with a perfect family or warm dinners around a glossy table, but in this stillness, in this ownership, in the breath of space where I could finally be myself without shrinking. Home wasn't the house. It was me choosing to stay. A week passed before the silence cracked. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, warm and drowsy, the kind of day where the wind rustled the oaks just enough to keep your thoughts from falling asleep. I was in the back room sorting through a cabinet of old linens when the doorbell rang. Caleb was sketching at the table and looked up, eyes questioning. I gave him a small nod, wiped my hands on a dish towel, and went to answer it. Sabrina stood on the porch. Her makeup was perfect, but her mouth was tight, drawn in a way that made her look older than she wanted to be. Her heels clicked against the concrete like punctuation. She didn't smile. "I'm not here to fight," she said quickly, before I could say anything. "Then what are you here for?" I asked, leaning lightly on the frame. She hesitated, eyes flicking past me like she was trying to measure the space she once considered hers. "Can we talk?" Against my better judgment, I stepped aside. She walked in, slow like she didn't want to touch anything too long, like the house had become foreign overnight. I led her to the living room, the one room I'd finally managed to make feel lived in. A few of Caleb's sketches were pinned to the wall, a blanket draped over the back of the couch, coffee cups on the side table. She didn't sit. She stood near the window, arms crossed. "I'm not going to pretend I'm okay with what happened," she started, voice clipped, "but I've had some time to think, and I realized maybe there's more to the story than we knew." I didn't respond. I let her fill the silence, because silence always made her uncomfortable. I was angry. "I still am," she admitted, softer now. "But I watched that video again, twice, and I remembered the night you left, how Dad slammed the door. I didn't understand it back then. I thought you were just running away. We were told not to ask questions." I looked at her then, not as my sister, but as someone trying, maybe for the first time, to understand instead of control. "You didn't ask questions because it was easier not to," I said. "You accepted the version of the story that made you feel secure. That made me disposable." She flinched at that but didn't argue. Instead, she looked down at her hands, fingers worrying at the edge of her sleeve. "I didn't come here for forgiveness. I came because I don't know what to do with this, with how it all ended, with how it began." I sighed, not from exhaustion, but from release. "That's not something I can fix for you, Sabrina. I lived in the shadow of this family's expectations for years, and when I finally broke away, no one looked back, not until there was something to lose." She looked up then, eyes shining, and for the first time I saw a guilt, raw and real, chipping away at the armor she always wore. "I just wanted you to know. I get it now. Not all of it. Probably not enough, but I see why you left. And I'm sorry it took Dad dying for me to even start listening." There was a long pause between us, the kind that doesn't feel heavy, just honest. I nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that." She left a few minutes later, no dramatic exit, just a quiet goodbye and a promise to call sometime. I didn't expect her to follow through, but I appreciated the effort. Caleb wandered into the room after the door closed. "That was her, huh?" he asked. I nodded. She needed to say something. Did it help? I thought about that. Not in the way she probably hoped, but yeah, maybe a little. He didn't ask more, just handed me a sketch he'd made while she was here. It was a drawing of our house, only brighter. The ivy was gone, the windows open, a bird perched on the porch railing. I ran my fingers across the lines, smiling. "It's beautiful. It's what I think it looks like now," he said. That night, I stood in the hallway with a box of letters Mr. Lane had given me. I hadn't opened them all yet. Part of me was afraid to dig too deep into the past, afraid the old hurt would feel fresh again. But I owed it to myself to know. I sat at the kitchen table and began reading one at a time. Most were brief, just money orders with scribbled notes like, "Hope this helps," or "For the water bill." But some had small additions. A news clipping about a library fundraiser, a postcard from Savannah, a receipt for winter boots. Every small thing I'd sent had made its way into this house like echoes trying to reach me. He never replied. Not once, but he'd kept every piece. Somewhere in the silence there had been watching. There had been noticing. And that was something. Days passed, then weeks. Slowly, the town stopped feeling like a place I had fled. It became a place I had reclaimed. The whispers at the grocery store faded. The woman at the bakery stopped raising her eyebrows when I walked in. The real estate agent down the street started calling me Miss Walsh instead of "You must be Harold's daughter." The shift wasn't fast, but it was real. I enrolled Caleb in a nearby school. He adjusted better than I expected, made friends by the second week, joined the art club. I bought him a sketchbook with thick pages and a new set of pencils, and when he hugged me, it was tighter than usual. That's when I knew we were healing. Not just him, both of us. One afternoon, I found myself back at the edge of the backyard. The same trees, the same fence. But the garden had long since overgrown. I pulled on gloves, grabbed some tools, and started clearing it out. Each root I dug up felt like lifting a piece of something old off my chest, like pulling pain from the soil. Caleb joined me after a while, barefoot and laughing as he splashed in the hose, the garden turning from graveyard to playground. I planted herbs. He planted sunflowers. We didn't talk about what the yard used to be. We just built something new. I think that's how healing happens. Not in big speeches, not in sweeping gestures, but in tiny decisions to stay, to grow, to breathe in a space that once stole your air. It had been 2 months since the funeral when a letter arrived addressed to both me and Caleb. No return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, anonymous. But the message was clear. What you've done is disgusting. This was never your house. You manipulated a sick old man for money and pity. We will not forget. There was no signature, but the tone screamed Eric, or someone he'd poisoned with his version of the story. I didn't show it to Caleb. I didn't need to. I tossed it in the fire that night and watched it curl into ash. Some ghosts don't deserve our attention. Some hauntings don't need exorcism, just silence. I chose peace, not passivity, not submission. Just peace. There was nothing left to defend. I'd already been seen, named, believed, and no amount of bitterness could undo that. The next morning, I stood on the porch, coffee in hand, watching the sun crest over the trees. The air smelled like honeysuckle and clean earth. Caleb opened the screen door behind me and leaned against my side. "You think he'd be proud of us now?" he asked. I looked at him, then back at the garden, at the house, at the quiet that no longer carried judgment. I think he finally was. And that matters. But what matters more is that I am. And just like that, it hit me. I hadn't just inherited a house. I had inherited a second chance. Not the kind that erases the past, but the kind that finally lets you live beyond it. The seasons began to shift without announcement. Spring crept into summer slowly, with longer days and the kind of heat that made the porch a second living room. The house no longer felt like a monument to regret. It felt lived in, real. The once cold hallways now held the scent of lemon soap and grilled cheese. Caleb's laughter echoed against the walls like it belonged there. And maybe for the first time since my feet hit that front step, I started to believe it did. The garden grew faster than I expected. The basil took over the east corner, and the sunflowers Caleb planted leaned so far into the sky they looked like they might pull free of the earth. He named each one, drew faces on the leaves with Sharpie. It was something small, but it mattered. We made routines out of ordinary things. Saturday mornings at the farmer's market. Sunday afternoons walking the trail behind the house. He joined the local library's art club. I started helping organize events there. Something about stamping books and helping little kids find fairy tales reminded me that beginnings come when you stop looking for endings. I wasn't waiting for anyone to call anymore. Not Sabrina. Not Eric. Not some long-lost apology from the family who watched me break and blinked like it was just weather passing through. Their silence was no longer a threat. It was a choice I respected, mostly because I didn't need their noise to define mine. But life has a way of testing peace when it finally starts to settle. It came in the form of a voicemail. I hadn't checked my phone for most of the day, distracted by a leaking pipe and a burnt batch of banana bread. The message was short. "Rachel, this is Dana from the county office. We had a visitor come in asking questions about the will filed for your father. You're still listed as primary contact, so we wanted to give you a heads up. Please call back." I knew it had to be Eric. The timing, the persistence, the entitlement, it fit him like a custom suit. I didn't call back right away. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the pattern in the wood grain, tracing it slowly with one finger. Not angry, not afraid, just tired. I had already survived the fire. I wasn't going to flinch at the smoke. When I did call Dana back, her tone was calm, almost apologetic. "He was asking about contesting the will," she explained. "But when we showed him the documents, your father's original signature, the date stamps, the witnesses, he didn't have a leg to stand on. Still, we thought you should know." I thanked her and hung up. That night, I sat on the back porch while Caleb drew constellations on his tablet. The air smelled like mint and earth. I didn't tell him about the voicemail. He didn't need that weight. He'd carried enough already in his 13 years. What mattered more was the look on his face when he spotted a cardinal in the trees and sketched it with a single, perfect stroke. His piece was my piece now. A week later, a letter came. Certified mail, legal letterhead. It was exactly what I expected, a final push from Eric's lawyer claiming emotional distress, undue influence, vague language about confusion and mental health. I skimmed it, didn't even blink. They were throwing shadows at a foundation made of stone. I forwarded the letter to Mr. Harland, who responded within the hour. "Empty threats," he said. "I've seen their kind before. They don't want justice. They want control. But we've got receipts. We've got timestamps. Let them posture." And posture they did. I heard from a mutual cousin that Sabrina had started spreading rumors. That I pressured our father in his final days. That I manipulated him, played the long game, preyed on his guilt. The usual poison dipped in polished words. I didn't respond, not even once. I learned a long time ago that answering lies only gives them oxygen. I let them choke on their own smoke. That silence was my greatest form of control. They hated it. Meanwhile, the house kept healing. It was slow work, but it grounded me. I painted the upstairs hallway a soft sage green, replaced the broken banister, refinished the wood floors myself, sanding down years of scuffs until they gleamed in the afternoon light. Every repair felt like an act of reclamation, not just of a home, but of myself. Caleb helped when he could, learning how to use a paint roller, how to fix a loose hinge, how to stand back and admire the way something once broken could be whole again. One night after dinner, he said, "You're different now." I looked up from the sink. Different how? He tilted his head like he was thinking through it. Not scared, not hiding. Like you're not waiting to be punished anymore. That landed harder than I expected. He was right. For years, I lived like punishment was always the next chapter. That every moment of calm was just an apology waiting to collapse. But now, I didn't flinch when the phone rang. I didn't brace myself when someone knocked on the door. I didn't shrink. I stood. I moved. I stayed. The following week, I received an invitation to a community fundraiser. They were renovating the park down the street and wanted residents to participate in a planning meeting. I went. Not because I needed to be seen, but because I had a voice now and it deserved to be used. I sat in that room with neighbors I used to avoid and raised my hand when it mattered. I suggested a mural wall one that local kids could paint. I volunteered Caleb to help design it. They clapped. He blushed. That was the moment I knew we were no longer just visitors in this town. We were part of it. The mural wall was approved. Caleb started sketching drafts. Birds, trees, open skies, no cages, no names, just beauty reaching outward. At home, I framed one of his drawings and hung it in the hallway near the front door. It was a hawk mid-flight, wings extended, eyes clear. I passed it every morning and reminded myself I had flown too. Not away, but into something new. The legal threats eventually stopped. I think even Eric realized he'd lost. Not just the house or the money, but the illusion of being the one in charge. The weight of being the chosen child had finally cracked, and there was no one left to catch him. Sabrina went quiet too. No more letters, no more rumors. Just a stillness I didn't trust but didn't need to worry about either. Let them stew. Let them vanish. I had no interest in chasing ghosts that had no home here. One afternoon, as I was sweeping the porch, I found an old coin wedged between the floorboards. It was his. My father's. The one he used to carry in his pocket like a lucky charm. I turned it over slowly, feeling the ridges. I hadn't thought about it in years, but I remembered the way he used to flip it before every big decision. Heads meant move. Tails meant wait. I smiled, tucked it into my pocket, and went back to sweeping. I didn't need it to make choices anymore. My compass wasn't external now. It was me. This life, the one I built from broken pieces, from silence, from rage that cooled into strength, it was mine. Every morning that began with coffee on the porch and ended with Caleb's laughter down the hall was proof. I had not just survived them. I had outlived their version of me. Autumn came like a slow exhale, brushing gold across the trees and softening the edge of every morning. The house settled deeper into its bones. Less haunted now, more lived in. The creaks in the floorboards felt familiar, like a song I'd grown used to humming under my breath. I started waking up before the sun again, not out of habit or anxiety, but because I liked the quiet. The stillness wasn't scary anymore. It was peace in a cotton robe and warm socks. Most mornings, Caleb joined me on the porch. He'd pull his sketchpad onto his lap, lean into the light, and start drawing while the world yawned awake around us. Sometimes we didn't even talk. We didn't need to. Just being there together, safe, anchored, was enough. One morning, he looked up from his page and said, "You know what I think this place is?" I looked over, smiling. What? A reset. Like a broken game that finally restarted the right way. I didn't respond right away. Just let that thought settle in the air like dust in sunlight. "Yeah," I said finally. "That's exactly what it is." It had been 3 months since the funeral. 3 months since I walked back into a past that used to hurt and decided not to let it shape me anymore. 3 months since the man who never said I'm sorry left me everything he couldn't say out loud. I still hadn't changed the name on the mailbox. Something about it felt intentional. A kind of bridge between what was and what now belonged to me. Sometimes I'd find neighbors slowing their cars as they passed, curiosity pressing against the windows like a face in a fogged mirror. They didn't stop to ask questions. They just watched, maybe wondering how the story ended for the girl who had vanished and returned like a ghost in jeans and muddy boots. But I didn't owe them a retelling. The people who needed the truth had heard it. Everyone else could stay in their version if it made sleep come easier. One afternoon, I found an old journal buried in a drawer upstairs. It was mine, from high school. The handwriting was neat, hopeful. I flipped through it slowly, expecting shame, maybe anger. But mostly, I felt protective. That girl had wanted so much from the world. Not in a greedy way. Just in a way that hoped things could be better than they were. She deserved more than she got. But she made it here. She made me. I tucked the journal into my nightstand like an offering to the version of me that survived without applause. That weekend, I hosted a small gathering. Nothing fancy. Just a few neighbors, some lemon bars, iced tea, folding chairs on the lawn. I didn't announce it. I just sent out handwritten notes and let whoever showed up, show up. And they did. Some with awkward hellos, others with warm smiles and homemade pies. Caleb set up his easel and painted under the shade of the big oak tree. A little girl from down the road asked if she could help. He handed her a brush without hesitation. And in that moment, watching them side by side, I saw everything I had fought for without even realizing it. Joy that didn't need permission. Belonging that didn't ask for proof. When the sun began to dip, and the guests wandered home, I stayed behind to collect the cups and fold chairs. Mr. Lane helped, humming an old tune under his breath. He looked around the yard and said, "This place feels lighter now." I nodded. "It is. You did that," he said. Not as a compliment, just as a fact. I didn't argue. That night, after Caleb went to bed, I walked through the house barefoot. Lights off, guided only by the hush of the wind and the rhythm of my own breathing. I paused in the hallway by the framed sketch, the hawk with its wings wide. I touched the corner of the frame lightly, like saying thank you. Not to the bird, not even to the drawing, but to the girl who once didn't think she'd ever fly again. In the study, I sat at my father's old desk for the first time. The chair creaked beneath me, worn and familiar. I didn't look for old papers or hidden letters. I didn't need them. The man who sat here once had been many things to me. Absent, cold, harsh, but also eventually honest. Maybe not in time to change everything, but in time to hand me the match and let me decide what to burn and what to keep. I opened the bottom drawer and found a photo tucked behind a stack of files. It was of me. Younger, arms crossed, stubborn chin lifted. Not a school photo, not one I recognized, probably taken without me knowing, but it had been saved. Carefully, kept close. I stared at it for a long time before sliding it into my pocket. I didn't cry. I didn't need to. I just smiled, small and quiet, and whispered, "You saw me, even when you pretended not to." A few days later, a letter arrived with no stamp, hand-delivered. I found it in the mailbox after my morning walk. Inside was a simple note from Sabrina. It read, "I'm leaving town. Starting over somewhere smaller. I don't know who I am without the house, the story, the spotlight. Maybe that's a good thing. I won't bother you again. But I hope, one day, we're more than this silence." I didn't respond. Not because I was angry, but because there was nothing more to say. Some relationships aren't meant to be rebuilt. Some are meant to stay in the past where they belonged. Letting go wasn't bitterness. It was clarity. That weekend, Caleb and I visited a beach an hour away. He brought his sketchbook. I brought sandwiches and a bottle of lemonade. We walked barefoot along the edge of the tide, toes sinking into wet sand, the wind tangling our hair. At one point, he looked up and said, "I think we're happy now." It wasn't a question. It was an observation. And he was right. Not perfect, not unscarred, but happy in the way that feels like breathing after holding it too long. When we got home that evening, I found myself staring at the front steps, at the porch light I had replaced, at the paint we touched up together, and I realized something important. This wasn't just the house I'd inherited. It was the one I had rebuilt with my own hands, my own choices, my own voice. I didn't need a father's approval or a family's permission. I had created something stronger than inheritance. I had created a life that couldn't be taken away. I had become the kind of woman who didn't need to be seen to know she existed, who didn't need applause to know she mattered, who had walked through fire and come out not unburned but unbroken. That night, I wrote a letter, not to anyone living, not to anyone waiting, just one final page for myself. I wrote, You were always more than they allowed you to be. And now you get to be everything, freely. This is not a second chance. This is your first real one. I folded the letter, sealed it, and tucked it into the drawer of my nightstand next to the old journal, a bookend to a chapter I had finished. Then I turned out the light, climbed into bed, and slept like someone who no longer feared the dark. Because finally, the house had stopped whispering. And so had I. Story 2. Melody's new job party was a small, intimate brunch that her friends and our family hosted at a hip cafe in Asheville's downtown. The table was crowded with congratulations, mimosas, and anecdotes about her recent mid-level position at a rapidly growing software company. I took a seat beside the window at the far end of the table. I continued to stir my coffee even though it had become cold, an old habit that helped me stay grounded. As usual, my sister Melody took center stage, so nobody really paid attention to me. Her engagement ring and freshly manicured nails gleamed in the sunlight as she sat with her legs crossed beautifully. With just enough charm to make it hurt, she exclaimed, "Harper," loudly across the table. "What precisely do you still do? At your age? Doing freelance work?" She turned to her buddy and laughed before I could respond. She simply can't seem to grasp the concept of a legitimate profession. "Just have a life, please." Nobody else chuckled. Melody alone, laughing at her own joke. Then she added louder yet, "Instead of being successful themselves, some individuals choose to emulate them." I didn't recoil. I kept my eyes off of her. I just pressed my lips together and continued to stir. "Mel," my mother muttered. "That's sufficient." But my sister only shrugged. Silence in Melody's world was an indication of failure. My father attempted to divert the conversation. Her grin lingered in the air like a dare, despite the fact that the avocado toast was under-seasoned. Although they all believed I was invisible, my invisibility had turned into both a weapon and a haven. They were unaware that Harper Jameson, myself, was a co-founder of Pulse Metrics, one of the nation's fastest-growing analytics companies. What's the best part? Rhythm. My sister. Pulse Metrics had recently hired the Spotlight Queen. She didn't know. I also didn't want to spoil the surprise. Being invisible was nothing new to me. It began long before work parties and brunches. I can very clearly recall my 11th birthday. Just now, the cake was set out on the table. Candles were lighted. To sing, everyone came around. Melody rushed out of the corridor with a huge trophy just as I was ready to make a wish. The tri-state dancing competition was recently won by her. With a voice stronger than the birthday song, my mother joyously made the announcement. Everyone gave a clap. The cameras rolled. I watched the cake while the candles flickered. Nobody inquired about my wishes. I didn't even blow them out. I recognized for the first time then that I would never be the narrative to be celebrated. Melody was a natural entertainer. I'm bright, bold, and always putting on a show. I enjoyed quiet. I like breaking things down to figure out how they worked and solving problems. Toasters and remote controls. Code. I began building my first simple algorithm on the used Chromebook that same year. I got it from Dad. I became enamored. Harper could sit in one place for 6 hours and not make a sound, according to my mother. "We have a flashlight and a firework in this house," Dad used to joke. "You can guess which is which." You don't have to guess. The firework was the melody. I was the silent light that no one saw. However, that remained constant. The roles remained the same as we grew older. She pursued a degree in media arts, had brief appearances on local television, and created a health business that briefly gained popularity before failing due to poor bookkeeping. I attended a modest college of technology, constructed systems, graduated with distinction. My graduation date was forgotten by everyone in the family. They were occupied with organizing a photo session for Melody's upcoming product launch. But I wasn't bitter. I just silently began to create. I co-founded Pulse Metrics with Derek, my former college roommate, when I was 29. We lived off of ramen and crazy ideas, pitched at startup expos, and coded in coffee shops. He became the company's spokesperson. I turned into the spine. Pulse Metrics was valued at over $100 million 3 years later. I had almost half of it. There was no sign of my name. And now my firm had recently employed Melody, the sister who never saw the beam behind the spotlight. The following morning, the offer letter was distributed. Melody Jamieson, budget analyst, Pulse Metrics salary approved, start date Monday. She had no idea the approval came from me. The fact that I was more than simply a remote technical consultant was only known to Derek. From the beginning, I was a co-founder. We decided that Derek's name would be the only one made public. He had the voice, the charisma, and the ability to get along with everyone. Behind the curtain, I liked the architecture more. I'd seen what happened to entrepreneurs who became faces. They no longer lived their own lives. The press wasn't necessary for me. I required control and privacy. I was just Harper, the senior system lead at Pulse Metrics, who ignored Zoom calls and worked strange hours. I only visited the office once a week, and it was always after 7 p.m., when the coffee maker had already been cleaned and the hallways were silent. From behind layers of encrypted logins, I made executive decisions, oversaw our architecture, and examined departmental budgets for the remaining period. It was Derek who gave keynotes and shook hands. Even in front of coworkers, he never once slept on my identity. I used to question if it was wise to remain secret. However, I was filled with pride and ambition when I saw Melody enter the world I had created. I was aware that it had been required. I also had her first day. I remained at home, but I used the covert function I had personally coded from the kitchen cam on the 9th level to log into the internal camera system. I noticed her confidently conversing with a coworker while pouring coffee. "It's crazy here," she remarked. "No one has ever seen one of the founders, you know." The second one, according to some, is merely a name on a legal document. I couldn't resist grinning. I had been referred to as a ghost before. I got a FaceTime from Derek that afternoon. "She's getting settled quickly," he said, polished. "Courageous, of course. Rhythm, still no clue who's signing off her approvals. Are you okay with this?" "For now," I said. "Let's keep it quiet. If she's here to work, fantastic. If she's here to impress, the truth will sort it out." I didn't want revenge. I sought understanding. How would Melody act when no one clapped? 2 weeks passed. I kept incognito until one night in the basement server room, monitoring backup security. I heard the click of heels in the corridor. I went out, and there she was, frozen. "Harper?" she questioned, eyes narrowing. "What are you doing down here? Only leadership gets access." I smiled gently. "Guess I have access then." She twisted her head, bewildered just as Derek strolled out of the neighboring storage room with a document in hand. "Hey, Harper," he said. "Need your sign-off on the Q3 model by Friday." I took the folder, looked back at Melody. Her eyes didn't blink. She didn't talk, but I could sense it. The crack developing. She'd just seen the first shadow of the truth, and I wanted to see what she'd do with it. That morning, Asheville was enveloped in mist, the kind that made buildings look like they were drawn in pencil. My phone chimed as I was finishing up the Q3 results report. It was Derek Harper, he replied with a faint chuckle. "I'd believe your sister is beginning to make some connections." I arched an eyebrow. A fresh email notification from the accounting subject appeared on my screen at the same time. Unmatched signature HJ42. "Verify executive power, please." My heart slowed. Time was me. Melody has been a part of Pulse Metrics for about 2 months. In that time, she had settled in swiftly, confident in meetings, forceful in budget discussions. I silently approved her requests while never using my entire name till today. My internal code, HJ, had been discovered by her. 42 following financial orders, contract memoranda, and budget approvals. The next morning, I sat in the business cafe, partially covered behind a newspaper, when I heard a familiar voice. "In any case, who is Harper J?" Melody questioned a coworker. "That name appears repeatedly in the budget logs." Nobody seemed to recognize her. Her colleague gave a shrug. "She's compared to a ghost by some. Sign only important decisions." Melody gave a snort. "Fantastic. An executive in secret. Names aren't reliable to me. I am unable to identify it." I gripped my cup tightly. She had yet to learn. Real things don't always have to be loud. She went straight to finance 3 days later and asked to see the executive budget log. Because of her level of clearance, she understood. She proceeded to open each file until she found the one that included my entire name. Harper Jamieson, CTO and co-founder. The reality was unavoidable with each page. Staring at the signature that authorized her first payment was the same sister who had previously referred to me as a charity case. I was alerted by the system that afternoon. Internal access has been noted. The executive archive of M. Jamieson was removed. The foundational documents had been accessed by her. Harper, Jamieson. The co-founders are Derek Lynn, Chief Technical Officer H, 5050 title, Jamieson. In that instant, I pictured her, eyes fixed on the look on the screen. When frozen Melody was horrified, she remained silent, but her eyes heated. To witness it for myself, I got to the workplace earlier than normal. As expected, she was standing at the counter in the second-floor break room, holding a printed page as if it were about to vanish. "Are you all right?" I asked quietly. Her voice became tight and low. "Are you one of the co-founders?" I gave a nod. "For what length of time?" she inquired. "From the start." This began with Derek and me at a Lexington Avenue coffee shop. She laughed bitterly back when you called me jobless. Thus, you have been my boss the entire time. You've been working hard, I said plainly. You're still here for that reason. She cast her gaze downward. I took a draft proposal for a charity data endeavor out of my folder and gave it to her. Next quarter, we'll begin a campaign centered on public school tech access. It would be ideal for you. Her countenance changed, but she didn't accept the paper. I turned to go. She would require room. But Melody didn't give me a contemptuous glance for the first time in years. Just silent introspection and perhaps a hint of remorse. The 5-year anniversary gala for Pulse Metrics was hosted at a glass-walled facility overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains, a modern architectural masterpiece perched above Asheville's cityscape. I stood in front of the wall mirror in the guest dressing room. I was wearing a sleek, simple black dress. My hair was carefully pinned back, and the only color I had was from a gentle rose wash on my lips. I wasn't dressed to stand out. Despite my fear, I dressed to fit in with the occasion. Shadows and stillness had always been reassuring. However, something was changing tonight. Derek leaned his head in and knocked softly. Are you prepared, Harper? I let out a breath. No one is, perhaps, but not really. He smiled slightly. Tonight you won't be coming out of the shadows. The light you created is yours. Just as the house lights went down, we made our way from the side wings onto the stage. The immaculate acoustics reflected the MC's voice. And now, please welcome the 2 co-founders of Pulse Metrics, Derek Lynn and Harper Jamison. The cheers were louder than I had anticipated. Clear, sharp, and increasing. I moved forward deliberately and slowly. Then I caught sight of her. Melody stood at the rear of the ballroom, her hand wrapped around a champagne flute. Her eyes were stuck in mid-expression, wide and untouchable. She did not blink. I had always been in her world. Just now, the unseen one had broken open. I was aware of that emotion as soon as we agreed to our first 7-figure deal, and I came to the realization that something we had silently constructed had all of a sudden become evident. Derek was the first to speak. He described the origins of Pulse Metrics. In a small studio apartment with 2 laptops and 2 buddies, they are coding through deadlines and storms, placing all of their money on a more intelligent method of reading the world's data. People nodded at the milestones and chuckled when it was appropriate. Then he extended the microphone to me. The room fell silent. For the first time in 5 years, I came forward. I wasn't using a forwarded approval code or a firewall. I was just there. I inhaled deeply, bringing myself back to the present. Hello, everyone. With a steadier voice than I had anticipated, I spoke into the microphone. I'm Harper Jamison, and I imagine for many of you, this is the first time you've ever seen me. A gentle roar of laughing filled the room. Warm, shocked, but not mocking, courteous. I'm not very good at public speaking, I added. To be honest, I never imagined that I would be standing here. Derek and I, however, had just 2 items 5 years ago, a concept and a shabby couch. We thought that well-designed technology might empower people rather than replace them. She was still standing close to the rear wall, her champagne glass now sitting on a neighboring table. When I stopped and looked around the crowd, her stance was stiff, her face inscrutable. She didn't blink, her eyes were fixed on me. She was attempting to determine how the stage had been constructed by the sister she used to ignore. Now she was filling in. I added softly, I know I'm not the public face of Pulse Metrics. That was a conscious decision. However, I felt that I owed you more than just a screen tonight. I owed you my presence out of appreciation, not recognition. Once more, the applause was stronger. With a little gesture of gratitude, I took a step back and put the microphone back on. The stage's lights changed to the dinner floors. I proceeded toward the buffet, intending to withdraw into a quiet nook like I often did, but that wasn't possible. Someone stopped me at every step. Harper is who you are. I believed you to be a myth. We had doubts about your authenticity. Stealth of a legend. Really? I gave a few kind responses and smiled, but my thoughts kept returning to Melody. I turned to gaze at the pillar where she had stood empty. She had left. I didn't know when she'd left or how much she'd heard, but I felt it. Something imperceptible, such as a shift in the room's pressure. It was an emptiness where I had hoped for a presence for the first time. Back at my flat that evening, I took off my heels and collapsed on the couch. It was too quiet where I was. After such a night, my phone buzzed for hours on end. Engineers, investors, and even my parents began to message me. Harper, you have our utmost pride. What a moment. You deserve this. I grinned, responded. Where? It was intimate. None of the ones from music were kept. Only those that seemed like bandwagon adulation were removed. No text, no calls were missed, Not even congratulations. I accessed the Chart Pulse Metrics website to view the gala's live feed replay. Fast forward to the moment when I took the podium, stopped. I watched as I took the mic. Play wasn't pressed by me. I gazed at the still image under the spotlight. What was it Melody saw? She used to roll her eyes at the small sister or a stranger, calling her uninteresting and preoccupied with spreadsheets. I arrived at work earlier than normal 2 days later, not to provide contracts approval, not for system updates, simply to accomplish something personal. In the meeting room on the 11th floor, in a drawer, I saved a little package of walnuts. Since college, it has accompanied me through server rooms, offices, and residences. I put 3 items inside: a handmade card, a black fountain pen, and a navy linen notepad. I had been writing for more than an hour. I wanted the words to seem real, not because they were difficult. I appreciate your contributions to Pulse Metrics thus far, Melody. You're intelligent, gifted, and I think you'll succeed. Working with you makes me proud, even if we didn't say anything at first. Harper. Sister. No. From your brother. Only facts and a decision. With a single, straightforward command, I gave the internal mail helper the box and sealed the card inside the notebook. Give Melody Jameson this. No sender. I didn't anticipate a response. Didn't need one. It wasn't an olive branch. It was only a door. Keep quiet. Unlocked. She may chose whether or not to stroll through the remainder of the week past in quiet. Melody left no message. No email. Thank you, but no. Take note. Only room. However, I began to notice another thing. In meetings, she no longer reclined back with her arms folded and her eyes half interested. She arrived early, took thorough notes, cleverly asked deliberate questions. After being adjusted for performance, her voice had become more steady. As she presented a new financial approach for an AI effort that had reviewed predictions, I waited silently outside a conference room one afternoon. As though she had constructed the system herself, she went over cost projections and modified models. Her tone was calm, crisp, her stance no longer shouted. Notice me? I come to contribute, it stated. I didn't enter. All I did was stand in the corridor. I nodded and put my hands in my coat pockets. Just for me once. Melody Jameson's idea for a staff-wide statement was circulated the following week. By starting mentorship circles and quarterly seminars led by department heads, the title Lift as You Lead internal sponsorship project aimed to assist junior employees, particularly women in atypical IT jobs. She had written in italics at the bottom, under inspiration. Harper Jameson's peaceful goal served as inspiration. I took my time reading the proposal 3 times, allowing each word to sink in. Even though I wasn't seeking attention, that phrase nevertheless helped me feel less burdened than I had previously realized. I entered the break room at my regular time that afternoon. Melody was standing at the counter, filling the electric kettle with hot water. She was by herself. Not a spotlight, not a crowd. We both stopped as she turned to face me. This time, there were no harsh edges in her eyes. She had no armor, no stiffness in her shoulders, only a silent consciousness. For the first time, I didn't recognize her as the sister who used to make fun of me for being invisible, and she nodded slightly. Someone was listening, I noticed. I was going to pass her. When Melody spoke, it was an ordinary moment in a calm afternoon. The notebook and the pen are lovely, she stated in a kind voice. I've already written several pages in it. I turned, astonished but composed. I'm happy you enjoyed it. She nodded slightly, gazing at the mug as if it contained more than just tea. She paused, then replied, I don't think I ever truly understood you, or maybe I simply never tried. I remained silent. I didn't have to. Sometimes the only way to allow someone to finish is to remain silent. She went on, I want to say something. She spoke in a deeper, more earnest tone than I had heard in a long time. This was not a place where you had to give me a chance. Not after everything I said. However, you did. Furthermore, you never hurled it at me. You didn't attempt to outshine me or disgrace me or make some huge statement. She raised her head. Uncertain but open eyes. That tells more about who you are than anything I've ever believed about you. The sister who once interrupted my birthday wish with a trophy was briefly invisible to me. The girl who made fun of me in front of the entire family at brunch was not someone I saw. I witnessed a woman gradually relearning grace and unlearning pride. I'm not sure whether I can do it correctly. With shaky words, she confessed. I'll try though. I let out a soft breath. The type you don't realize you've been carrying for years. I said, we don't have to go back in time. We simply start today. We remain side by side for a short while longer. No witnesses, no spotlight. Only silence and kind comprehension. Grand gestures and a cinematic scene were absent. Sorry, just the facts. At last it was acknowledged, and it was sufficient. And things did shift in some way. The loudest person in the room was no longer Melody. She interrupted less and listened more. Even if younger voices faltered, she allowed them to finish their sentences. She volunteered for the unglamorous labor. She once made fun of the spreadsheet, the budget audits, the cleanups, and the backstage work. And me? I no longer shunned my own image. I began giving speeches at technical briefings, taking the mic during onboarding meetings, and clearly stating to interns that you don't need to be loud to lead all without displaying vanity. All you need to do is know your destination. I was packing to leave one Friday afternoon when I walked past the elevator's recognition wall. Melody Jameson, her name was mentioned as the top Q2 contributor. She read it silently while standing a few feet away. She gave me a little smile as we looked at each other. "Thank you," she replied, "for not giving up on me." I returned the smile. "We have only just begun." Our family got together that Sunday at our favorite brunch location, a bright cafe close to Park Square with worn wooden seats and the lingering scent of maple syrup. Something felt different, even though everything appeared to be the same. Melody arrived several minutes late. Just a white blouse, trousers, and a loosely tied ponytail, no makeup or gaudy heels. She stepped up to me and offered a modest nod. I returned the nod, simply by being there without making a show of it. Later, Uncle Ron turned to me and smiled as my mom continued to talk endlessly about her tomato garden. Harper is still working with her computer. Sitting in front of numbers all day must be enjoyable. Before I could respond, I grinned. Melody put down her cup. "Uncle," she stated plainly. "The smartest person I've ever met is Harper. The first wouldn't be where I am now without her." The table became silent. She gave me a direct glance. I used to ignore what she taught me. It's not always true that true strength speaks first. Silently it builds. When it's ready, it uses deeds rather than cheers to communicate. Uncle Ron blinked. My aunt nodded slightly and thoughtfully. My mom leaned over and softly squeezed my hand after the dinner as we packed things to depart. Melody stepped beside me. "I have my jacket," she muttered. "You don't have to forgive me, but I've changed as a person." I turned to her, and I smiled from an unguarded place for the first time in a long time. "I know," I answered, "and you never had to apologize to me." We left in silence, but not the type of silence that separates people. It was the type of thing that lets something new start. I had a cup of tea and sat by the window later that night, observing the Asheville lights as they fade into the surrounding hills. Derek's message appeared on my screen. I said, "Heard brunch wasn't half bad today." Not bad. Sometimes healing comes without much fanfare, so let's call it a fresh start. It comes when individuals meet one other for the first time, not with outdated expectations, but with peaceful, sincere comprehension. Although Melody and I will never be picture-perfect sisters, we are no longer at odds. We are two adult females. They both changed. They're both still learning. And that, in my opinion, is more than plenty to end one chapter and subtly start the next. Story 3. They didn't intentionally exclude my name. When the photographer peered at his list, then at me, and back again, he muttered something along those lines. +1. Before realizing, he asked too intelligently, "I apologize." "I take it you're Samantha, the sister of Chad." I gave a nod. He went on, turning the page without making any corrections. Under the flowery arch, the family portrait was already being set up. Lavender and white flowers, stylish and pricey. I was holding the little clutch my mother had given me years ago while I stood just outside the frame, close to a column that was adorned with sparkling lights. She referred to it as timeless. As if that compensated for the quiet, because I was wearing the same navy blue dress I wore to Chad's college graduation. Mom told me it brought us luck the day before the job, the rejections, the apartment flood, and before people stopped asking how I was actually doing. So I remember, she referred to it as her lucky dress. Since then, I hadn't worn it. Here I was once more. No picture, same family, same clothing. The music grew louder inside. A contemporary remix of a classic song, the sort that poses as important. I remained close to the dance floor's edge, near enough to be courteous, not far enough to interfere. Nobody took attention. "That must be the consultant sister," someone murmured, brushing past. The word consultant always seemed like a filler to them, like something people used when they hadn't worked things out yet. They never asked and they didn't know, so I grinned a little. Samantha Fields was included on the place card. F in lowercase. Smudged ink tucked near the edge of table 14. Not with relatives, not with old pals. In the middle of Chad's college fraternity and the ex-boyfriend of a distant cousin, They were already discussing trekking equipment and cryptocurrency. Grinning, I drew out the chair and folded my napkin in silence. The linen had a lilac-like scent. I froze the smell for a moment. It was from when Grandma used to humming ancient songs under her sun hat, while she trimmed the shrubs in her yard. In order for the lilacs to blossom in time for important occasions like weddings, graduations, and recitals, she planted them. The fragrance always indicated you belonged. Money and scent were the only things involved now. Glistening in satin and spray tan, one of the bridesmaids leaned in my direction and smiled rehearsedly. "I take it you're the freelancer?" she inquired. "We weren't expecting you." I believe she meant it with kindness. Or perhaps not. As I grabbed for my water glass, I noticed that pals who resembled magazine covers were laughing while chatting across the room. He remarked, "She switches jobs like clothes. Someone laughed too soon." He continued, "We just call her the artist of unemployment." More giggling. Louder this time. I didn't respond. Just let my lips meet the glass. Cool. Grounding is still ongoing. The bridesmaid looked from the laughs to me. Not sure what to say. I smiled again, saving her the bother. I've always been able to vanish when necessary. I refrained from crying outside. The main reason I went to the coat room was to take a breath. There, it was colder. The carefully chosen pleasure coats hung in tidy rows like ancient ghosts away from the clinking champagne. My fingertips skimmed over them, pausing at one that appeared to be Dad's but wasn't. He never showed up, claimed to be having hip trouble, but I knew better. Even when no one asked him to, he always took a side. I stood there contemplating whether or not to go. Make a vehicle call. Make up a story about being sick. I heard heels at that point. Gentle, steady steps. She entered as if she hadn't intended to find me, Mom. Naturally, though, she did. She was always aware of my whereabouts. She was reticent to talk, even as a child. She just repositioned the shawl over her shoulders and gave me a kind glance in the mirror over the coat rack. Please don't ruin Chad's moment. Today, just be your calm self. It wasn't mean. Just like she had mentioned earlier, bear practiced. Perhaps not aloud, but in the way she gazed at me each time I made an attempt. I nodded because I didn't have the energy to dispute, not because I agreed. She gave my arm a quick tap before following her outside. My reflection was a pale navy frock with creases along the middle and fading lip color. I appeared to be someone who was successful at avoiding attention. Uninvited, a memory floated up. 12 years old. A newspaper in the area. I had published my poetry about the sea. Mom interrupted. For a short while, she folded it inside her pocketbook. Beside her credit cards, she carried my words. However, time went by, the praise waned. I did too. Most of the garden terrace was deserted. Only the murmur of a far-off fountain and string lights above. A few patrons stayed behind at the bar, juggling their drinks with sporadic small conversation and wedding favors. I had no intention of placing any orders. I just wanted a place where I couldn't be followed by the sound. Then I heard someone speak, calm, measured. "I'm not as bold as you are. I never endure these situations without a drink." I pivoted. He was Chad's elder, early 40s maybe. Clean suit, easy stance. You know, the sort of dude who needs no proof. Unsure of what to say, I smiled nicely. He offered his hand. "Elliot, Samantha." He gave a nod. "You are the consultant, then?" It sounded nothing like a query. I paused. "They refer to me by that name." He arched an eyebrow. "Are they even aware of your work?" It nearly made me chuckle. "No, but the mystery appeals to them, makes it simpler to discard." He studied me while sipping his drink. He acted as though he already knew, rather than passing judgment. I looked in the direction of the house. I didn't expect to remain this long. "Are you this ready all the time? What you imply is unclear to me. You've been observing everything, but you haven't said anything. Isn't that what analysts do?" I froze for half a breath, then responded honestly. "I mostly write risk assessments for financial mergers, but occasionally I also write on pressure points related to politics, strategy, behavior, and reputation." He cocked his head. "Samantha Fields, did you write the paper on Arcadia?" My stomach grew constricted. "Yes, I did." Slowly, he put down his drink. "Last October, that completely changed my boardroom." I gave him a close look this time. It was then that I recognized him, Elliot. For now, Chad's boss. We both remained silent. Elliot simply examined me as if he were mentally reliving boardroom exchanges, attempting to relate this reserved woman in a blue dress to the information that had previously moved millions of dollars. I made no further offers. It wasn't necessary for him. The music then changed. A bit more volume, a bit more ostentatious. Someone called for speeches while tapping a fork on a glass. Elliot turned to look at the house. Guests were expected. Though not together, we walked back in together. His head turned to the front table. I drifted near the back, close enough to hear. Not visible from a distance, Chad handled the microphone as if it were meant for him. He expressed gratitude to the families, friends, and merchants. He joked. Polished ones. Even when they shouldn't, they land. People chuckled. The champagne was helpful. Then he changed his tone. A few of us. He claimed it was risky to raise his glass. Constructed objects. Assumed actual positions. Others? Some of us, however, continued to be creative, and that's okay too. A wild card is necessary for every family. A rippling sound of laughing. Courteous. Not sure. He avoided looking at me. He was not required to. My face remained expressionless, staring at the centerpiece before me. Hydrangeas, synthetic, lovely. It didn't feel like it was being honest. Elliot didn't laugh. In fact, I caught him frown just barely, and then glance across the room right at me. He raised his glass a little and held it there, but his face was unreadable. I didn't grin. I simply mirrored him. It could be a silent toast between strangers or something else. The music resumed after the speeches, now louder, chasing everyone toward the dance floor. The lights dimmed just enough to blur the edges of the room, turning it into a collage of laughter, clinking glasses and the soft rustle of satin. I stepped outside again. The patio was quieter, lit by the soft glow of garden lanterns. I leaned against the railing, watching dragonflies dance above the water lilies. Just for a moment, I let myself breathe. Then I heard footsteps. Steady. Familiar. Elliot. He joined me without a word, holding 2 glasses. He offered one. No pressure. Still hanging back, he asked, voice low. It's where I do my best work. He smiled at that. We stood there listening to the muffled music behind us. Then he said almost casually, Are you still with Arcadia? I gave a nod. Freelance, but yes. I'm reviewing their positioning during mergers, compliance narratives, reputation, strategy. He looked impressed, but not surprised. My firm's been eyeing Arcadia, he said. We're in exploratory talks. No one knows yet. I kept my face still. That's interesting timing. It is, he said. Then he glanced sideways. We've read your work, your white paper on institutional friction. It reframed our whole approach. I didn't answer. I merely took a modest drink from the glass. He continued. There's a lot of noise out there. People who desire attention, titles, headlines, and then there are folks who move things softly. The type the noise wants to forget. He wasn't simply talking about business anymore. Back inside, someone laughed too loudly. A relative, maybe, or one of Chad's business pals. I didn't care enough to check. Elliot spoke again, but with more tact. It's not Chad I want to bring in, but you. I only understood then that they had remembered him, but up until now, they had forgotten me. The throng within had changed. The DJ was announcing games now. Facts. Dances for couples. The bridal party's toast. Unnoticed, I slid through. The manner in which I was constantly close to the gift table. An easel supported the seating chart. Gold trim, hand-lettered cards, flourishes and ribbons, and imported material. Earlier, I hadn't looked at it. I did now. There was my name. Barely. Samantha Field spelled incorrectly. Use light ink. As if the printer was exhausted. There is no table number next to it. Only an arrow indicating in the direction of overflow. If it hadn't hurt, it would have been amusing. I should have stopped staring at it sooner. Then another thing emerged. I hadn't addressed that recollection in years. The college essay that Chad was unable to complete. The night before it was due, I had completely redrew it for him. He worried when our parents were out of town. I continued to edit till 2 o'clock in between lukewarm coffee sips. He entered full ride. First option. He never expressed gratitude. Not once. I turned to face the rear hallway, repositioned my shawl, and blinked the memories away. There was Elliot standing close to the kitchen door. He gave me a smooth, embossed card that was heavier than it appeared. He said, I'll be in touch. Then, following a pause, Your name is already in the room, but we don't disclose who we collaborate with. Without looking, I placed the card inside my clutch. No spectacle, no great gesture. Simply quiet motion. It's too late for the good folks to notice. It was almost time for dinner. Everything became amber as the lights grew progressively dimmer. They had just finished dessert. Gold flakes, sponge sugar, and a lemon raspberry tower. Quite deserted. At my table, nobody touched theirs. I had no intention of remaining this long. One more wave of acknowledgments ensued as the microphone went back to the microphone. Some clapped more out of courtesy than interest. Conversations were calmer now. The atmosphere had become softer, and the drinks had settled in. At that point, Elliot got up. No clink of glass, no fanfare, just a serene presence. The sort that naturally quiets a space. "Thank you, bride and groom," he remarked, "for a lovely evening." Everyone gave a clap. "There's another person here tonight who made a difference," he added. "Not only in my personal life, but also in the way my company assesses human capital and risk management." People shuffled in their chairs. Chad sat up more. Elliot stopped, letting the moment extend. Her work altered our way of thinking and decision-making. She changed the way we deal with volatility by emphasizing clarity over volume. Chad waited for the compliment to land where he believed it should, looking around with a hint of amusement. Elliot turned to face me. He said, "Miss Fields, it's a privilege. We ought to have brought you on board sooner." There was no gasp in the room. It didn't have to. All the task was done by silence. Forks stopped in mid-stride. A few people looked around. One of the assistants for the bridesmaids dropped her napkin. Chad's lips opened a little, but nothing came out. I remained silent, failed to stand. I simply raised my glass. A little nod. No show. Elliot, too. He nodded back like it had already been settled. Since it had, things didn't return to normal after that. Not immediately. Once more, the music began. Cheerful. A touch too loud. As if someone had instructed the DJ to lighten the mood. However, the room's energy had changed. The way people spoke gave it away. They followed me with more caution now, then quickly averted their gaze. They arrived gradually, but I didn't actively seek anyone out. I hadn't spoken to a second cousin in a long time, whispering as he leaned in. "You always seemed quiet to me. I was unaware that you were genuinely employed." A guest from Chad's company also sent a heartfelt congrats, then hurriedly inquired as to whether I was accepting new clients. I didn't respond. This time, I simply grinned. Not the type one used to impose at barbecues and birthday parties. This one was heavy. Chad didn't show up. With his drink in hand, he stood close to the bar and nodded absently while someone told him a story. Like she was attempting to make sense of something that no longer made sense, his fiancée, who is now his wife, kept looking between us. Just before he left, Elliot found me again. "I'll see you on Monday," he inquired. I gave a nod. Nothing noteworthy. No handshake, no loud voice or dramatic leave. Just an equal-to-equal agreement. I would be providing consulting services for Chad's division, Arcadia. However, Elliot never really stated that. I also didn't inquire. Retaliation wasn't the point. No more. It was about being present and not having to justify my departure before the dance started. No lengthy farewells or announcements. It was only a silent route out, past the coat room where Mom had discovered me earlier, along the side corridor. The breeze had beckoned from outside. The stars were gentle in the sky, the type that only becomes apparent when you're by yourself. She left me a voicemail when I got home. She sounded as if she were reading from a script. She did not know if she believed. She said, "I'm happy you're doing well. It was good to see you. Chad's under a lot of strain lately. Perhaps you two could have a conversation. You might be able to assist him." She didn't say sorry. She didn't inquire about my feelings. Just proposed that I play the steady one once more, as in the old days. I didn't return the call. Rather, the first reached for a notebook, the kind that contains half-finished grocery lists and recipe clippings that was hidden inside my kitchen drawer. I took a blank sheet of paper and jotted down a recipe. Pound cake with lemon. Grandma used to make that one. The one that no one else ever learns. Mom felt it was no longer worth the time. However, I recalled each step. The old document was still in my possession, nestled between the pages of a book that no one ever checked out. I tore out the page once I was done writing, folded it nicely, and sent it to myself. No justification. A silent reminder of what they had forgotten and whatever I still had on me. I didn't open the mail for a week. Like any other piece of mail, it had come. Neither the penmanship nor the stamp are very noteworthy. However, I was aware of its contents. After all, I had mailed it. I spread the recipe out flat on my kitchen surface after unfolding it. It was my penmanship. It wasn't a recollection. It belonged to a me no one could recall. The person who would frequently bring lemon cake to school events, who ensured anniversaries were celebrated even when no one else did, and who remained up late retyping assignments. I lighted a lilac-scented candle. The wedding is the same. Grandma's garden is the same. I didn't feel like I was pursuing or proving anything for the first time in a long time as the air gradually filled, or holding out for a visitor. I watched the city hum beneath a gentle, uncaring beat as I stood by the window. Then I took a little action. I opened the drafts folder on my laptop and erased the emails I had never sent. The ones that started first. If I ended up making things awkward, I apologize. I only wanted to give an explanation. I was no longer in need of them. They didn't need to know what I had accomplished or what they had overlooked. I wasn't upset. Not at all. And I wasn't triumphant. Just be clear, 3 sides of the boardroom were made of glass. The sort of room that is meant to make an impression without trying. I got there early. It's habit, not nervousness. I didn't need my notes, but they were already organized. Elliot had secured the collaboration using a brief that I had authored. I had framed the danger and molded the story. I already knew, and I didn't need to be reminded. The door opened. Elliot was the first to arrive, and he had the same composed demeanor as during the wedding. The rest of the team followed him. One of the regional directors, department leaders, and strategists. Chad, too. He took a while to notice me. He was distracted in the middle of a conversation. But he stopped when he did. For a moment only. No dramatic pause, no outcry. That spark in his eyes, just. The change from presumption to fact. I gave a nod. Courteous. Expert. The manner people do when introductions aren't essential. He sat down. With no fanfare, Elliot took his seat across from me and started the meeting. He said, "This is Samantha Fields. She will be in charge of Arcadia's integration strategy external consultancy." Nobody questioned it. No one asked why. Since I wasn't the sister here, I was the room's expert, the one they had nearly missed. I didn't show anything by smiling. I didn't give him another glance. The meeting started after I opened my notepad. The surface was marked. They didn't ever check below it. However, I did, and I'm here for that reason.